The blue waters of Kepler 442b sparkled under the light of two small suns. Below the surface, the Zephyrian city of New Coral stretched across the ocean floor like a living jewel. The buildings grew from the seabed itself, shaped by years of careful cultivation. Schools of colorful fish swam between the towers while Zephyrian children played in the gardens of seagrass. Captain Lyra Vex floated in the command center of the Orbital Defense Station. Her pale blue skin shimmered as she moved through the water-filled chamber. Like all Zephyrians, she breathed water instead of air. Her large dark eyes could see far into the deep ocean below and the star-filled space above. The peaceful morning was broken by urgent beeps from the sensor array. Lieutenant Cale Finn swam quickly to Lyra's side, his fins beating rapidly with worry. "Captain, we have multiple contacts approaching the outer system," he reported. His voice carried clearly through the water. "The computer counts over 300 ships." Lyra's blood went cold. 300 ships could only mean one thing in this part of the galaxy. She swam to the main display screen and watched as red dots appeared at the edge of their solar system. "Run identification scans," she ordered. But even as she spoke, she knew what they would find. The screen flickered and showed the brutal angular shapes of Korthak warships. The reptilian raiders were known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty. They destroyed entire worlds just to steal their resources. Whole species had disappeared after meeting the Korthak fleet. "Ma'am, it's Admiral Gorvash's personal fleet," reported Ensign Nira Corral from the communications station. The sensors show his flagship, the Bone Crusher, leading the formation. Lyra had heard of Gorvash. The massive Korthak commander had burned a dozen worlds in the past year alone. His ship was said to be built from the bones of creatures he had killed with his own claws. "How long until they reach us?" Lyra asked. "At their current speed, 18 hours, Cale answered. "Captain, we only have 12 patrol boats. They're not even real warships. They're just fishing boats with small guns attached." Lyra looked around, at her crew. They were scientists, farmers, and artists. The Zephyrians had never needed to fight. They lived in peace with the ocean and with each other. Violence was something they read about in stories from other worlds. "Send a message to all Zephyrian colonies," she ordered. "Tell them to prepare for evacuation to the deep shelters. Move all children and elderly to the safest areas." As her crew carried out the orders, Lyra stared at the approaching red dots. 300 Korthak warships against 12 converted fishing boats. It wasn't even a fair fight. It was pure slaughter. She swam to her private office and activated the long-range communication system. If the Zephyrians were going to die, at least the galaxy should know what happened to them. "This is Captain Lyra Vex of the Zephyrian Colonial Defense Force," she began recording. "Our peaceful world is under attack by Admiral Gorvash and his Korthak raiders. We are a civilian population with no military capability. We have never harmed anyone in the galaxy." She paused, looking out at the blue world below. Millions of Zephyrians lived in those underwater cities. They grew food for trade with other worlds. They cleaned polluted oceans for species who had forgotten how to care for their planets. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to live in peace. "We are sending this message on all known frequencies," she continued. "If there is anyone out there who believes in protecting innocent life, please help us. We don't have much time. The Korthaks will be here in less than 18 hours. She added their exact location and technical details about the Korthak fleet. Maybe some military somewhere could use the information, even if they couldn't save the Zephyrians. The message was broadcast across the galaxy on every frequency the station could reach. It would take time to travel to distant worlds, but Lyra had to try. Hours passed. The Korthak fleet grew larger on their sensors. Lyra watched reports come in from her patrol boats as they tried to set up a defensive line. Captain Reefstorm commanded their strongest vessel, a converted mining ship with exactly 2 small cannons. He positioned his tiny fleet near the outer planets, knowing they would likely all die in the first minutes of battle. As the day wore on, a few responses came back to their distress call. Most were polite refusals. The Galactic Trade Federation sent their sympathy, but explained they had no military forces. The Crystalline Empire apologized but said Kepler 442b was too far from their borders. A dozen other civilizations offered prayers and good wishes, but no ships. Lyra was not surprised. The Korthax were too dangerous. No sane species would risk war with them to save strangers on a distant world. Night fell over New Coral. The city's bioluminescent lights began to glow as the Zephyrians prepared for what might be their last evening. Families gathered in the deep shelters, holding each other close. The children asked their parents why the bad people were coming, and the adults had no good answers. On the surface, Lieutenant Kale worked frantically to strengthen their shields. The orbital stations had some defensive capability, but they were designed to stop asteroids, not military weapons. Ensign Nira monitored communications, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, might answer their call for help. "Captain," Nira called out suddenly. "I'm getting a response. It's coming from a system called Earth." Lyra swam quickly to the communications station. Earth was not a name she recognized. Most of the galactic civilizations were known to the Zephyrians, through trade or scientific exchange, but this Earth was completely unknown. "What do they say?" she asked. Nira's expression was confused as she read the message. "They say, they're coming. They're sending their entire fleet to help us." "Their entire fleet? How many ships?" "They don't say exactly, but Captain, there's something strange about this message. They sound angry. Not at us, but at the Korthax. Like they take this personally." Lyra read the message herself. The humans, as they called themselves, used simple, direct language. They promised to reach Kepler 442b in time. They told the Zephyrians to hold on and keep fighting. They said something that stuck in Lyra's mind. Nobody hurts innocent people, while humans can do something about it. It was a nice thought, but Lyra wondered how many ships this unknown species could possibly send. Even if they had 50 vessels, it wouldn't be enough against Gorvash's Armada. Still, for the first time that day, she felt a small spark of hope. Somewhere in the galaxy, people she had never met were willing to risk their lives for strangers. Maybe the universe wasn't as cold and empty as she had started to believe. The Korthak fleet was now only 6 hours away. Soon they would find out if the humans were real, and if they could keep their promise. Jake Miller rubbed his tired eyes and reached for his third cup of coffee. The night shift at Luna Base Communications Center was usually quiet. Most of the galaxy slept at the same time, so distress calls were rare during these hours. The computer beeped softly, indicating an incoming transmission on the emergency frequency. Jake expected another false alarm or a traitor with engine trouble. Instead, he found himself listening to the most desperate plea for help he had ever heard. The voice was soft and musical, but filled with terror. A species called Zephyrians were about to be attacked by something called Korthak Raiders. Jake had never heard of either group, but the fear in the alien's voice was real. He quickly forwarded the message to Earth Defense Command and marked it as urgent. Within minutes, his secure phone rang. "Miller, this is Admiral Kate Sullivan. Did you verify that transmission?" "Yes, ma'am. The signal is definitely from outside our space. The coordinates place them about 47 light-years away. I ran the Korthak references through our database and found some disturbing information." Jake sent the files to the Admiral's computer. Records from independent traders described the Korthaks as brutal killers who destroyed entire civilizations. They were known throughout several galactic sectors as the worst kind of pirates. "Get me a connection to the Defense Council meeting room. Emergency session. All members present within 1 hour." Jake worked quickly to establish the connections. Soon, military leaders from across human space were appearing on screens in the council chamber on Earth. Admiral Sullivan stood before the main display, showing the Zephyrian distress call and the threat data about the Korthaks. The room was filled with arguing voices. General Pete Adams spoke first. "Admiral, with respect, this is not our problem. These aliens are completely outside human territory. We don't even know if they're telling the truth." "The Korthaks could turn on us next," added General Carol White from the Mars Defense Force. "If we fight them now, we might provoke them to attack human colonies." Commander Lisa Brown disagreed strongly. "That's exactly the wrong thinking. If we let bullies destroy innocent people, we become part of the problem. These Zephyrians have done nothing wrong." She brought up her own intelligence files on the Korthaks. "Look at this data. They've destroyed over 30 civilizations in the past decade. They take slaves, strip planets bare, and kill anyone who resists. If we don't stop them now, they'll just keep getting stronger. Admiral Sullivan studied the information carefully. The Zephyrians seemed to be peaceful traders and scientists. Their cities were underwater and their technology was focused on healing damaged planets. They had never fought a war in their recorded history. "How fast can we get ships there?" she asked. Captain Ryan Torres, commander of the battleship USS Enterprise, checked his navigation computer. 47 light-years would take our fastest ships about 36 hours at maximum hyperspace speed. But Admiral, we're talking about 300 enemy vessels. We'd need everything we have. Then we send everything we have. The room fell silent. No military force in human history had ever been deployed so far from Earth for people they had never met. "Ma'am," General Adams said carefully, "are you sure about this? We're talking about risking the entire Earth defense fleet for aliens we know nothing about." Admiral Sullivan turned to face the assembled officers. "Let me ask you all something. What kind of species do we want to be? Do we want to be the kind that hears innocent people crying for help and turns away? Or do we want to be the kind that stands up for what's right, even when it's dangerous?" She activated the main communication system, connecting to every human military base, colony, and ship in space. "This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of Earth Defense Command. I am authorizing Operation Deep Strike. All available ships are to report for immediate deployment to the Kepler 442 system. This is not a request. This is humanity's first chance to show the galaxy who we really are." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Ryan Torres was the first to respond from the USS Enterprise. "Admiral, request permission to lead the advance force. We can be ready to launch in 4 hours. Captain Amy Foster of the heavy cruiser USS Defiant was next. "My ship is already loaded and ready. Just give us the coordinates." From the asteroid belt, Colonel Steve Murphy reported that his assault carrier group could launch within 6 hours. Mining ships began requesting weapon upgrades. Colonial defense forces started moving toward the rally point. But it was the civilian response that surprised everyone. News of the Zephyrian crisis spread through human communication networks faster than official military channels. Captain Dan Wright, whose cargo ship USS Leviathan had been converted for asteroid mining, called in to volunteer. "Admiral, I've got mining lasers that can cut through ship armor and a crew that knows how to fight. We're coming too." Helen Murphy, who ran a small freight company, offered her entire fleet of 12 ships. "We can carry supplies and evacuate civilians if needed." Within 12 hours, the largest military force in human history was gathering near Jupiter. Official military vessels were joined by converted civilian ships, private security companies, and colonial militias. News reporters called it the long journey, as more ships kept arriving. Admiral Sullivan received reports that over 800 ships had committed to the mission, with more joining every hour. The fleet included massive battleships, quick destroyers, converted cargo vessels, and even some racing ships whose owners had mounted weapons on them. The most surprising addition was a group of human scientists led by Dr. Ben Carter. They had studied the Zephyrian distress call and wanted to meet this peaceful species that could heal planets. "Admiral," Captain Torres reported, "we now have over 1,500 ships ready for deployment. This is bigger than anything we've ever attempted." "Any word from the Korthax?" Sullivan asked. "Our long-range sensors picked up their communications. They're intercepting our messages and trying to figure out what humans are. They seem confused about who we are and why we're coming." Admiral Sullivan smiled grimly. "The Korthax were about to learn something important about humans. When innocent people called for help, humanity answered. Not with a few ships or a token force, but with everything they had. All ships prepare for hyperspace jump. We have friends to save and bullies to stop." The massive fleet began moving toward the hyperspace jump point. Ship after ship disappeared into the swirling energy that would carry them across the galaxy. Human families watched the news reports with pride and worry. Their sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, were heading into the unknown to fight for strangers. Jake Miller watched the fleet depart from his position on Luna Base. He had started this with a simple distress call, but now the entire human race was committed to helping people they had never met. Somewhere in the Kepler 442 system, the Zephyrians were still waiting and hoping. Soon they would learn that their call for help had been heard by a species that took protecting innocent life very seriously. The Korthaks were also about to learn something new about the galaxy. There was now a species that would cross impossible distances to fight bullies and protect the weak. The universe was about to become a much more dangerous place for those who preyed on others. Admiral Thek Gorvash stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, and watched his fleet tear apart the outer defenses of the Zephyrian system. The massive Korthak commander was over 8 feet tall, with scales that had been scarred by decades of battle. His claws were permanently stained with the blood of enemies and his eyes glowed red with the joy of destruction. "Report," he growled to his communications officer. "The outer station is destroyed, Admiral. 12 small ships tried to defend it, but we eliminated 10 of them. The survivors are running back toward their planet." Gorvash laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Pathetic. These water creatures are even weaker than I expected. Begin bombardment of their orbital facilities." The Korthak fleet spread out in attack formation. 300 warships moved like a dark cloud toward the blue world below. Each ship was designed for one purpose, to destroy and conquer. The Korthaks had perfected the art of war over thousands of years. On the planet's surface, Captain Lyra Vex watched the destruction from her underground command center. The orbital stations that had protected her people for centuries were being blown apart one by one. Pieces of metal and debris fell from the sky like burning rain. "Ma'am, we've lost contact with Defense Platform 7, reported Lieutenant Kale. "Platform 3 is reporting heavy damage. They're requesting permission to evacuate." "Evacuate all platforms," Lyra ordered. "Save as many people as we can." She activated the planetary emergency system. Across New Coral and the other underwater cities, warning lights flashed. Millions of Zephyrians swam quickly to the deep shelters that had been carved into the ocean floor. Parents carried their children while elderly Zephyrians were helped by their neighbors. The 2 surviving patrol boats, commanded by Captain Reef Storm, tried desperately to slow down the Korthak advance. They darted between the enemy ships like tiny fish avoiding sharks, firing their small weapons and then running before the much larger warships could respond. "This is Storm to base," came his voice over the radio. "We damaged one of their scouts, but they're bringing up heavy cruisers. We can't hold them much longer." Above them, Admiral Gorvash grew impatient with the small defenders. "Send the Skull Squadron to deal with those annoying little boats. I want them destroyed now." 20 Korthak fighters launched from the main fleet. They were fast and heavily armed, designed to hunt down small ships that tried to escape. The 2 Zephyrian patrol boats had no chance against such overwhelming force. Captain Reef Storm's last transmission was cut off by static as his ship exploded under the combined fire of the Korthak fighters. The second patrol boat lasted only a few seconds longer. "All local defenses eliminated," reported the Korthak tactical officer. "The planet is completely defenseless." But even as Gorvash prepared to begin the final attack, his communications officer brought disturbing news. "Admiral, we're intercepting strange transmissions. There's a large fleet approaching this system. They call themselves humans." Gorvash had never heard the name before. "How large?" "The numbers don't make sense, sir. They're claiming to have over 1,000 ships." Gorvash laughed again. "Impossible. No species has that many warships. It must be some kind of trick or translation error. How many ships could they really have? 20? 50? "Sir, our long-range sensors are detecting hyperspace disturbances consistent with a very large fleet. Whatever is coming, it's much bigger than anything we've seen before." The Korthak commander studied the sensor data. It did show unusual activity at the edge of the system, but he couldn't believe the numbers. 1,000 ships was larger than most entire galactic navies. Send Squadron Leader Vrak with 50 ships to deal with this human fleet. That should be more than enough to destroy whatever is really coming. Far across the galaxy, the human fleet traveled through hyperspace at maximum speed. Captain Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of the USS Enterprise, watching the swirling energy outside his ship's windows. Around him, over 2,000 human vessels moved in perfect formation through the hyperspace tunnel. "Captain, we're receiving updates from more ships requesting to join the fleet," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Ben Hayes. "The colony ship New Hope wants to help. and 3 more corporate security fleets have volunteered. Tell them to catch up if they can, but we're not slowing down, Torres replied. Every minute we delay, more Zephyrians die. On the heavy cruiser, USS Defiant, Captain Amy Foster reviewed the intelligence reports about Korthak tactics. The reptilian raiders were known for their brutal efficiency, but they had never faced an enemy with human determination. Ma'am, the engineering teams have finished the weapon modifications, reported her tactical officer. All ships in our squadron are now carrying maximum firepower. Colonel Steve Murphy's assault carriers were filled with Marines who had volunteered for the mission. These were soldiers who had trained for boarding actions and planet-side combat. They studied the Korthak ship designs looking for weaknesses they could exploit. Remember, Murphy told his troops, these aliens think they can attack innocent people without consequences. We're going to teach them how wrong they are. The fleet included ships from every part of human space. The battleship USS Leviathan, commanded by Captain Dan Wright, carried mining equipment that had been converted into powerful weapons. The frigate squadron led by Commander Helen Murphy had been modified for high-speed attacks. Dr. Ben Carter and his science team traveled aboard a research vessel that had been hastily armed with defensive weapons. They carried medical supplies and translation equipment, hoping to help the Zephyrians after the battle was won. Captain Torres, Dr. Carter called over the communication system. I've been analyzing the Zephyrian language. They seem to be a highly peaceful species. Their culture has no words for concepts like massacre or genocide. They literally cannot understand why the Korthaks want to hurt them. This information made the human crews even more determined. These were not just aliens under attack. They were innocent people who had never hurt anyone. Back in the Kepler 442 system, Admiral Gorvash received the first reports from Squadron. Leader Vrak's scouting force. Admiral, you need to see this, came Vrak's panicked voice. The human fleet it's enormous. I count at least 2,000 ships, maybe more. They're still coming out of hyperspace. Gorvash's red eyes widened. 2,000 ships was impossible. No species in the galaxy had that kind of military power. Even the mighty Korthak Empire only had about 5,000 ships total, spread across dozens of sectors. You must be mistaken. Run the sensor sweep again. Sir, I've run it 5 times. The readings are correct. This human fleet is bigger than anything in our databases, and Admiral, they're not stopping. They're coming straight at us at full speed. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Gorvash felt something he had almost forgotten. Uncertainty. His 300 ships had seemed overwhelming when facing a dozen Zephyrian patrol boats. Against 2,000 unknown warships, the odds had suddenly changed. All ships formed defensive positions around the planet. Send a message to these humans. Tell them this system is under Korthak control. Order them to leave immediately or be destroyed. But even as he gave the orders, Gorvash wondered what kind of species could field such a massive fleet. And more importantly, what kind of people would send their entire military force to save complete strangers on the other side of the galaxy? He was about to find out. The edge of the Kepler 442 system exploded with light as over 2,000 human ships dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously. The fleet stretched across space in a formation that had never been seen before in galactic history. Massive battleships flew alongside converted cargo vessels. Military destroyers traveled next to civilian freighters that had been hastily armed with mining lasers. Captain Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of the USS Enterprise and stared at the tactical display. The human fleet was spread across thousands of kilometers, but every ship held perfect formation. Behind them, more vessels continued to arrive as volunteer crews caught up with the main force. Sir, total ship count is now 2,300 and still climbing, reported Lieutenant Ben Hayes. We're receiving final status reports from all squadron leaders. Torres activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is Captain Torres. We came here to save innocent people and stop bullies. The Zephyrians are counting on us, and we will not let them down. Across the human fleet, crews made final preparations for battle. On the heavy cruiser USS Defiant, Captain Amy Foster watched her weapons officer run system checks on their main guns. All batteries report ready for combat, the officer announced. We're loaded with armor-piercing rounds and ready to show these Korthaks what human weapons can do. Colonel Steve Murphy's assault carriers launched their first wave of fighter craft. Hundreds of small human ships spread out in attack formation, piloted by volunteers who had never fought in space before but were determined to help. The battleship USS Leviathan, under Captain Dan Wright, powered up weapons that had been designed to crack asteroids. The mining lasers had been modified to cut through military armor, and the cargo holds were filled with missiles donated by colonial defense forces. Commander Helen Murphy's frigate squadron took position on the fleet's flanks. Her ships were fast and maneuverable, perfect for hit-and-run attacks against larger enemy vessels. On the planet below, Captain Lyra Vex watched the human fleet appear on her sensors and couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Lieutenant Kale, run those sensor readings again. That can't be right." "I've checked 3 times, Captain. There are over 2,000 human ships in our system. They're arranging themselves between us and the Korthak fleet." Lyra stared at the Y display in amazement. The humans had kept their promise. Not only had they come to help, but they had brought their entire civilization with them. Admiral Gorvash studied his own sensors from the bridge of the Bone Crusher. His 300 ships suddenly seemed very small compared to the massive human Armada. But he was still a Korthak, and Korthaks had never retreated from any battle. "Send a message to the human fleet," he ordered. "Tell them this system belongs to the Korthak Empire. Order them to leave immediately or face destruction." Chaksoi message was transmitted to the USS Enterprise. Captain Torres read it and smiled grimly. "Send this reply," he told his communications officer. "To Admiral Gorvash of the Korthak forces. You have attacked innocent people who never harmed anyone. You have exactly 1 minute to withdraw your ships and leave this system. This is your only warning." Gorvash received the human response and roared with anger. No one had ever dared to give him an ultimatum. These unknown aliens thought their numbers made them strong, but they had never faced Korthak warriors in battle. "All ships, attack formation. Target their largest vessels first. Show these humans what happens when they interfere with Korthak business." The Korthak fleet began moving toward the human armada. 300 sleek warships accelerated to attack speed, their weapons powering up for battle. Captain Torres watched the enemy ships approach and felt a strange calm settle over him. All around the human fleet, 2,300 ships waited for his order. "All vessels, you are free to engage. Protect the Zephyrians and stop the Korthaks. Make humanity proud." The space between the 2 fleets erupted in weapons fire. Korthak plasma beams lanced out toward the human ships, while human missiles and energy weapons responded in kind. The battle for Kepler 442b had begun. The first exchanges revealed important differences between the 2 forces. The Korthak ships were individually more powerful, with heavier weapons and stronger shields, but the humans had overwhelming numbers and something the Korthaks had never encountered: perfect coordination between thousands of different vessels. Captain Amy Foster's USS Defiant took heavy fire from a Korthak heavy cruiser, but 3 human destroyers immediately moved to support her. Their combined firepower overwhelmed the enemy ship's defenses and sent it spinning out of control. "This is Foster to all ships," she broadcast. "Their individual vessels are tougher than ours, but they can't handle coordinated attacks. Work together and we can take them." Colonel Steve Murphy launched wave after wave of assault craft against the Korthak formation. His pilots had trained for years in asteroid fields and could maneuver their ships through impossible spaces. They darted between the larger enemy vessels, hitting weak points and engines. Captain Dan Wright's USS Leviathan engaged 3 Korthak dreadnoughts at once. His mining lasers cut through their armor like it was paper, while his missile batteries kept the enemy ships from getting close enough to use their heaviest weapons. "All mining vessels, focus your lasers on their engine sections," Wright ordered over the fleet communication system. These tools were built to cut through the toughest materials in space. Commander Helen Murphy's frigate squadron used hit-and-run tactics that confused the Korthak commanders. Her ships would appear from behind asteroids, fire their weapons, and disappear before the enemy could respond. The Korthaks had never fought an enemy that used such creative tactics, but the battle was not one-sided. Human ships began taking casualties as Korthak plasma weapons found their targets. The converted cargo ship New Frontier exploded under fire from a Korthak destroyer. The frigate USS Courage was cut in half by a plasma beam meant for a larger vessel. Captain Torres watched the casualty reports come in and felt each loss personally. These were volunteers who had come across the galaxy to help strangers. They deserved better than to die so far from home. All ships, press the attack. Don't let their sacrifices be wasted. On the planet below, Captain Lyra Vex and her people watched the battle with growing amazement. The humans fought with a coordination that seemed impossible. Ships from different worlds and different commands worked together as if they had trained together for years. "Captain," Lieutenant Kale reported, "the human fleet is pushing the Korthaks back. They're destroying enemy ships faster than they're losing their own." Admiral Gorvash realized his fleet was in serious trouble. The humans had more ships than he could count, and they used tactics he had never seen before. Worse, they seemed to care more about protecting the Zephyrians than about their own safety. "All ships fall back to defensive positions around the large moon. We'll make our stand there." The surviving Korthak ships, now reduced to less than 200 vessels, retreated toward Kepler 442b's largest moon. They hoped to use its gravity and terrain to help even the odds, but Captain Torres had no intention of letting them escape. "All ships, pursue the enemy. We end this here and now." The human fleet gave chase, their ships moving in perfect formation across the battlefield. Behind them, the wreckage of destroyed vessels from both sides drifted in space, silent testimony to the cost of protecting innocent life. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. The space around Kepler 442b's largest moon became the site of the final battle between humans and Korthaks. Admiral Gorvash had positioned his remaining ships in the moon's shadow, hoping to use the terrain to his advantage. Less than 150 Korthak vessels remained from his original fleet of 300. The human armada approached in a formation that had never been seen in galactic warfare. Over 2,000 ships moved as one unit, their coordination perfect despite coming from hundreds of different worlds and organizations. Captain Ryan Torres studied the enemy positions from the bridge of the USS Enterprise. The Korthaks had chosen their defensive position well, but they were still outnumbered by more than 10 to 1. "Admiral Gorvash," Torres broadcast on an open channel, "you have lost this battle. Surrender now, and we will allow your surviving crews to leave this system safely. Continue fighting and we will destroy every one of your ships." On the bridge of the Bone Crusher, Admiral Gorvash listened to the human ultimatum with growing rage. In his long career, he had never surrendered to anyone. The idea of giving up to these unknown aliens was unthinkable. "Send this reply to the human commander," he growled. "Korthaks do not surrender. We will fight until the last ship is destroyed. Come and try to take us if you dare." Captain Torres sighed as he received the response. He had hoped to end the battle without more bloodshed, but the Korthaks had made their choice. "All ships, final assault. Surround the enemy position and attack from all sides. End this quickly." The human fleet split into multiple attack groups that approached the moon from different angles. Captain Amy Foster's USS Defiant led one group around the moon's north pole, while Colonel Steve Murphy's assault carriers attacked from the south. Captain Dan Wright's USS Leviathan approached directly, drawing enemy fire while the smaller ships maneuvered into position. The Korthaks fought with desperate fury, knowing they were facing their final battle. Their plasma weapons reached out like deadly fingers, destroying human ships that came too close. The converted freighter Star Runner disappeared in a ball of fire. The destroyer USS Brave took critical damage and began drifting out of control, but the human advantage in numbers was overwhelming. For every Korthak ship, there were 15 human vessels. The aliens found themselves surrounded and outnumbered at every turn. Commander Helen Murphy's frigate squadron darted between the larger vessels, targeting Korthak engines and weapon systems. Her ships moved like sharks through the battle, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. "This is Murphy to all frigates," she broadcast. "Target their command ship, that big ugly one with all the spikes. If we take out their leader, the rest might give up." 6 human frigates converged on the Bone Crusher, firing everything they had at Admiral Gorvash's flagship. The massive Korthak vessel returned fire, its heavy weapons designed to destroy much larger ships. 2 of the frigates were vaporized instantly, but the remaining 4 pressed their attack. Captain Dan Wright saw the frigates in trouble and brought the USS Leviathan into the fight. His modified mining lasers cut deep into the Bone Crusher's armor, exposing vital systems to attack. All nearby ships, focus fire on that flagship, Wright ordered. Let's finish this. Over 30 human vessels concentrated their weapons on Admiral Gorvash's ship. The Bone Crusher's shields failed under the massive assault, and explosions began tearing through its hull. On the bridge, Admiral Gorvash watched his fleet being destroyed around him. His communications officer reported that over half their remaining ships had been eliminated. The human tactics were unlike anything in Korthak military doctrine. "Sir, we're taking critical damage to the main reactor," his engineering officer reported. "We need to evacuate immediately." Gorvash looked at the tactical display one last time. The human fleet surrounded his remaining ships completely. There was no escape and no hope of victory. For the first time in his life, he faced total defeat. "All ships," he broadcast to his surviving commanders, "retreat from this system immediately. Save what you can." The remaining Korthak vessels, fewer than 40 ships, began trying to escape toward the edge of the system. But the human fleet was faster and more maneuverable. Captain Torres had positioned ships at every possible escape route. The Bone Crusher shuddered as its reactor went critical. Admiral Gorvash had time for one final message to his fleet before his flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. "This is not over, humans. The Korthak Empire will remember this day. With their leader dead and their fleet shattered, the surviving Korthaks scattered in all directions. Some were destroyed as they tried to escape, while others managed to jump into hyperspace and flee toward the galactic rim." Captain Torres watched the last enemy ship disappear from his sensors. The battle for Kepler 442b was over. Humanity had won its first galactic war. "All ships stand down from combat status," he broadcast to the fleet. "Begin search and rescue operations for survivors from both sides. We're not butchers, we help anyone who needs it." On the planet below, Captain Lyra Vex and her people emerged from their shelters to find their world safe. The orbital stations were damaged but could be rebuilt. Most importantly, no Korthak troops had landed on the surface. She activated her communication system and sent a message to the human fleet. "Captain Torres, this is Captain Lyra Vex of the Zephyrian people. We cannot find words to express our gratitude. You crossed the galaxy to save people you had never met. We owe you our lives." Torres smiled as he received the message. "Captain Vex, we came because it was the right thing to do. No one should have to face bullies alone." Within hours, Admiral Kate Sullivan arrived with additional ships and diplomatic personnel. The victory at Kepler 442b had sent shockwaves across the galaxy, and Earth needed to prepare for the consequences. Dr. Ben Carter's science team was among the first to visit the Zephyrian underwater cities. The aquatic aliens were amazed by human diversity and impressed by their technology. In return, they offered to share their knowledge of terraforming and planetary healing. "Our worlds have been damaged by centuries of war and industry," Dr. Carter explained to Captain Lyra. "Your people could help us restore the oceans and clean the air. In exchange, we can offer our protection from species like the Korthaks." The negotiations resulted in the Treaty of Kepler 442b, the first formal alliance between Earth and an alien civilization. The agreement established humanity as the protectors of Zephyrian space and created a mutual exchange of technology and knowledge. News of the battle spread across the galaxy at light speed. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly found themselves studying reports of the massive fleet that had appeared from nowhere to fight injustice. The peaceful Aldorians sent a diplomatic mission to Earth, seeking protection from raiders in their own territory. The Crystalline Empire offered trade agreements wanting access to human military technology. Even some former enemies began sending messages, hoping to avoid conflict with the new galactic power. But not all the attention was positive. The Korthak Empire was furious about the defeat of Admiral Gorvash. Other aggressive species began to see humanity as a threat to their expansion plans. The victory at Kepler 442b had made Earth many new friends, but also some dangerous enemies. Captain Torres stood in his quarters aboard the USS Enterprise, looking out at the blue world below. The Zephyrian cities glowed softly in the deep oceans, and he could see human ships working alongside alien vessels to repair the damage from the battle. Admiral Sullivan's voice came over the ship's communication system. "All ships, prepare for return to Earth. We have a galaxy to explore and new friends to protect." As the human fleet prepared to leave, Captain Lyra sent one final message. "Humans of Earth, you have shown the galaxy what it means to stand up for others. The universe is a brighter place because you exist. We will never forget what you have done for us." The massive fleet began its journey back to Earth, carrying the knowledge that humanity had passed its first test as a galactic civilization. They had proven that humans would travel any distance and face any danger to protect innocent life. Behind them, the Zephyrians began rebuilding their world, knowing they were no longer alone in the galaxy. They had found allies who would cross the stars to help them, and they intended to prove themselves worthy of that friendship. The galaxy had changed forever. There was now a species that answered distress calls from strangers and fought bullies, wherever they found them. The age of humanity among the stars had truly begun,